means 600 men could put 600 balls down at a target. So the concept of 18th century warfare was to march your men up into a position where you could turn them into a human machine gun and pepper your enemy with fire and slowly close that distance, because you really began hitting people at 50 yards, and you certainly could start hitting people at 35 yards. But as any school child in this audience knows, how fast can you do the 50-yard dash in gym? So you're fighting battles at ranges that we play football or soccer on. You're fighting major battles and engagements in distances that are very short ground, and you can clearly see the man or men that you're trying to kill or be killed by. Now, at these distances, you had to have a secondary weapon because, again, how fast could you do a 50-yard dash? And they invented a socket bayonet which fit over the muzzle of the musket, locked on, and extended out 17 inches. It was a triangular blade, which made a triangular wound, and was extremely deadly. A matter of fact, the triangular bayonet was banned by the Geneva Convention after World War I in the last century. That's how brutal a weapon it is. So if you got stabbed by a bayonet in the 18th century, you have a triangular wound that you can't sew up, and you're going to end up bleeding to death. So you have the bayonet as actually the crucial weapon of the battlefield. You go in, you lay down fire on the enemy, you close the distance, and then you bring your men forward in a sweeping bayonet charge to literally drive the men off, drive the other force off with cold steel and hand-to-hand combat. It's a very different type of warfare, but it's governed by the weapon system of the time. And this is all in pre-industrial world. Now, to do the firing, the men have a leather cartridge box on the right hip, and they have pre-rolled paper cartridges. The lead ball would be in the bottom, so that they can load and fire as quickly as possible and not have to take time to measure powder from a powder horn as they would do when they were hunting. Now, the weapons are fired by a flintlock mechanism at the back, which is a piece of flint which strikes a hardened piece of steel called a frizzen and creates a spark that drops into a pan at the back of the musket, where you put a priming charge of powder. That priming charge flashes in the pan and goes through a small touch hole and sets off the main charge. But as I've tried to verbally describe here, it's a very Rube Goldberg, very hit-and-miss ignition system, and you can constantly have misfires. And you will see this occur during this reenactment. Now, just as it occurred, you've got some of the loyalist women that had followed the army coming out with their protective guards. They've looted and are removing food stores, while the men are holding off the American forces that have come up that look to be a mixed body of militia and American Continentals. Militia were all males in North America, in every colony, were required by law to serve in the militia from 16 to 60. and you were required by law to have a gun in the house, have powder and ball in the house, have an edged weapon in the house, and turn out at a moment's notice for military duty when called. So the militia are citizen soldiers that would be called out when needed, and if you didn't show up, you could be fined or imprisoned. But you're not a regular soldier. Our National Guard today is the descendants of the militia, but our National Guard are volunteers who train regularly and have quite a lot of military skill. The militia possibly could have monthly drills, but they were not matched for regular army troops. And as you can see, the redcoats that have come out are firing precision volleys. The American forces are replying in a much more scattered fashion. Now, you notice that the redcoats have a drummer with them. The fife and the drum were not just there for marching cadence, but if you listen, the drummer is playing a series of commands to signal the men what to do. And over gunfire and cannon fire, you can hear the sound of a drum or the shrill of a fife. So the musicians of the 18th century were the equivalent of our modern radio men, signaling the men on what to do and when to do it. They have drum commands for prime and load, fire, right about face, retreat. So they are critical communicators on the battlefield, and the officer would tell the drummer what to play, and the men were trained to respond to those commands. Now, speaking of weapon systems, there were also some innovative things going on during the American Revolution. From our frontier, especially here in Virginia, came what was called the Pennsylvania long rifle, since it was evolved in Pennsylvania. They had figured out that you could take an octagonal barrel and bore it and put grooves in it to create rifling. This came over from Germany, where the German Jaeger rifle was developed. And in Pennsylvania, they lengthened the barrel, they made the bore smaller, so it would take less powder and less shot to be accurate. And these were deadly accurate hunting weapons with a range of 300 yards. But the octagonal barrel couldn't hold a bayonet. And without that bayonet, a rifle takes at least a minute or longer to pound.